This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm with Councillor Tim Anderson, who's the lead councillor for finance at the at Guildford Borough Council, and we're here to discuss the draft budget, which was agreed at the council's executive on Tuesday. Hello, Tim. Thank you for joining the Guildford Dragon.
Hello there, Martin. Good to see you again.
Okay, so let's get straight into it then. What is the budgetary shortfall that you're working with at the moment, and what are the main countermeasures you're expecting to deploy?
Okay, so if you remember that last year we had a shortfall of £6 million, which obviously hit us really hard and quickly because of COVID. This year we've had a bit more time to breathe, and we reached the point where we're £3 million in deficit. We have very successfully plugged that deficit with a number of one-off items that we have found proverbially down the back of our financial sofa. So the biggest one is 1.5 million from cashing in a investment fund that we have, which has produced a 1.5 million gain. So we're able to cash that in, reinvest the £2 million capital, so to rebuild another gain. We now then have another 4 items which have contributed the other 1.5 million. So the net result is for 21-22, the current year, I'm very happy to say we'll have no budget deficit.
Okay, but there are going to be cuts, aren't there, in what you would have normally done if we hadn't have had some of the problems that you faced over the last year?
Oh yeah, I mean, that reaching that 3 million, we've had to incur a lot of cuts along the way, and we plan more cuts. So for the coming 4 years, and I struggle with this, but it's 2022-23 to 2025-26, we currently budget that we will have a shortfall of £5.5 million. Could be a bit more, could be a bit less, obviously, but that's our budget, and that is the big challenge we face over the coming 4 years. So there are only 2 ways we can plug that gap. You know, having reduced that 3 million, we pretty well run out of one-off items that we can produce out of a hat. Going forward, we've either got to increase revenue or decrease spending.
Okay, and there is only right. So in the money that the council spends, there are 2 general categories, if I can describe them that way. One is there's the money you have to spend to meet your statutory obligations, the things that are written in law of services that you have to provide. You have no choice. And then there are other services which are discretionary. They are things you'd like to provide, but you don't have to legally. So presumably, it's that last area that may be more subject. Well, you can't cut the statutory ones without, you know, I mean, there may be some efficiencies you can make, but the discretionary ones are the ones that are going to be more vulnerable. Is that correct?
That's it. That's where our concentration is on. So all sorts of range of items where we have in the past chosen to support various organisations. So for instance, the Yvonne Arnaud Theatre gets something like £350,000 a year. We propose we cut that by about 10%, and we'd like to reduce that a bit more going forward. But we give the Yvonne Arnaud a lot. We've been talking to them, give them a lot of warning, and try and help them move forward. And we can help. We can also, if we can, of course, we have much more scope with our capital budget than our general funds. So if there was some way we could support some improvement, refurbishment at the Yvonne Arnaud, we could do that as long as we could cut our discretionary funding through our general fund. So,
Okay,
we try
sorry
to be
to,
flexible in these
yeah,
things.
sorry to interrupt, but just so that people
Yeah.
understand. So what is the difference between the capital budget and the maintenance budget?
Well, the big difference is the capital budget. We're allowed to borrow money, principally through the government.
And what's it for?
Well, that funds all our capital expenditure. So, Wayside Urban Village, for instance, a lot of the upfront payment has come out of our capital budget. We borrow the money from the government and we spend it through the capital budget.
So that's purchasing things that you're going to keep, like a property, as opposed to maintaining things that you have.
Yeah, I mean, the general budget is the one that has to balance every year. Central government doesn't have to do that. It can borrow for its immediate expenditure. We're not allowed to. Every year we have to balance the general fund budget, and so that is the challenge. Hasn't in earlier years it wasn't a challenge. We're quite a wealthy borough in over historic periods, and we have invested very wisely. So, for instance, we own a lot of commercial property in places like Slyfield and Middleton Estates. We own we own some shops, not very many, fortunately, and the income from that is in the region of 5.8 million per year, and it's pretty steady. That's great income, and I inherited those estates. I can't claim any credit for it. We've tried to expand the portfolio, and we do so as much as we can in what is a ferociously competitive market at the moment in commercial property. So, we have various means for income to help balance the budget, but there's always a limit to it, and the government has recently put even more limits on it because of other councils have been a bit wild and loose in the way they've invested.
Okay, now I know there are, through the comments we get, there are people concerned about the impact or the possible impact on Guildford Museum, on Guildford House, Guildhall. What can you say to those people that are concerned? How are they likely to be affected?
Well, we are looking at all of these discretionary expenditure areas, looking how we, for instance, moving the tourism into the tourism service into the museum, and we're consulting over that.
Is that happening, Tim? Because I'm getting mixed messages on that it was going to happen, and now it might go to the Guildhall, for instance.
At the moment, it's still being decided.
Okay.
I think that there are pros and cons in all these different things.
Mm-hmm.
For my money, beg your pardon, the museum is a little bit off of the beaten track in terms of a tourist information centre. On the other hand, it would enable us to open the museum for longer each day. So, there are pros and cons in all these things, and we're weighing them up and discussing them. But for some areas, like the citizens advice bureaus, the need for cutbacks is really apparent. So we spend £350,000 a year subsidising the 2 citizen advice bureaus we have in the borough. No other comparable council in our area spends, all of them spend roughly £100,000 less than us. So we're contemplating and propose reducing our expenditure by 25%. Sorry, not 25%, £25,000, which is less than 10%. Small decrease. And we've been talking to the CABs and saying, look, guys, can't you find other funding? Can't you perhaps look to some way of working together to reduce your expenditure? So this isn't a blunt instrument. We do take a lot of time and effort to talk and consult, but when you find yourself spending 100 grand more per year than comparable councils, you look around and think, well, maybe we're making a mistake here.
Right. Okay. Now, we've spoken about some of the constraints you have in your budget planning, and we've already mentioned the need you have, the legal requirement you have to balance the budget, and also to provide statutory services. But another factor in this is, over the years, the reduced government funding, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can you just explain how that's decreased?
Yeah, well, from 2013-14 to 2018-19, government funding reduced from £4 million to zero. So in looking at it slightly differently, from 2013 to 2019, government funding overall, so the first one was revenue support grants, government funding overall reduced by 50%. So that got us to 2019 just in time for the COVID to hit. So it couldn't have weakened us at a worse time, and that's central government funding.
Okay, and then you're also seeing reduced income from some of your major areas of income. In particular, I'm thinking about parking.
Yeah, I mean, generally, from parking, we got £1 million revenue per month. It's down at 80% of that. So that takes off a big slice of our income. And of course, during the COVID, the lockdown, we opened all the car parks and everybody could get in for free. So we've got zero income over that period. So yes, unfortunately, the parking income hasn't restored yet to 100% of where it was before. Okay.
And isn't there a risk that it won't ever go back to pre-COVID levels, especially as not only through COVID, but through the climate change policies, we're encouraging people to get out of their cars. So isn't it likely that that will remain at a decreased level?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It is another dilemma, isn't it? That it's one of our big earners, and yet we've voted for a climate change emergency. So we can't have our cake and eat it all the time. We are, however, moving forward rapidly now on building on Guildford Park Road, for instance. We're moving rapidly forward to build on Bright Hill, 2 open car parks and 2 underutilised car parks. So there will be some transfer into other car parks, some of which charged higher, and we are candidly looking at how we could increase car parking charges, and that's within our discretionary control.
Okay, another large area of income is property rents through the council's property portfolio. How do you assess the risk associated with that investment?
Well, if you're talking about what I would call council housing, no,
not necessarily. No. I'm talking about you get rents from your property investment. Some of it's council housing, but so how do you see the? Excuse me, I'm just getting rid of that. How do you see the risk associated with that income? Do you think that's low risk?
Yeah, for our industrial property, basically it's held up all the way through the COVID crisis. And as we've been refurbishing the Middleton estate, which we own 100%, and as we relet those properties, we can relet them at a much higher rate. And they're going like hotcakes. People are queuing up to buy them off plan. That's absolutely fantastic. During the COVID crisis, we do own a few shops, not very many, thankfully. We had to give some rent holidays, and we own the freehold of some restaurants. And again, we had to give them some rental holidays. But generally, they're good businesses. One of the attractions is they're family-owned businesses. So that's another reason why we were keen to give them support. And now they seem to be doing very well. And so our rent arrears are very low.
Okay, but nothing's risk-free. I mean, but your assessment is that there's a low risk that income is going to dip significantly.
Oh, absolutely, yes. It didn't dip significantly during the worst of the crisis, and hopefully the worst of the crisis is over.
Okay, and what about the situation with the reserves? Because it was in the debate that preceded the executive meeting, it was said that you've had to dip into the reserves, and that's obviously an uncomfortable position. So presumably part of your plan is to build those back up.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, in last year we had to dip in and use £6 million of reserves because everything had to be done very rapidly. As I've also said, we're using no reserves this year, thanks to being quite creative. But it still leaves our reserves at 5.8 million, which are dangerously low. We think a sensible level is £12 million of reserves. These are usable reserves. So we have lots of other reserves, but some of them are tied up in perpetuity that we just can't touch. So in total, we have about 34 million that we can't touch. So, quite often the equation looks distorted because of these reserves, but some of them are for supporting SANGs and so on, where the SANG is going to be there in perpetuity. There's no way that we can touch that money. So 5.8 we think is inadequate. 12 million would give us more comfort. So as we go through the next 4 years, we've got to work on building up towards that figure.
Okay, so when do you think what's the year we can look forward to and think by that time we should be back on an even financial keel at the council?
Martin, I'm not sure I'm going to give.
Okay.
I think what we've achieved this year has been a miracle, quite honestly, to balance the books. When we were just a few weeks ago, I was discussing it with the officers and saying, goodness me, still 3 million down. And we talked about various ways we could try and plug the gap. And they ran around after our chats and found the money. And it's remarkable. But, nobody should think that we can pull this rabbit out of the hat every year, unfortunately. No. Okay. So I really don't know. But it also depends on how we can increase, how the people of Guildford are willing to accept some higher prices. So are they willing to accept paying a little bit more to park their car than they did in the past? We charge less than Woking does for parking our cars. So why can't we make up that shortfall? So in some respects, we all have to pull together in order to achieve the aims.
Okay, now I know you've spoken to me on previous occasions about the confidence you have in the financial council officers at GBC. Is their performance being maintained at the same high level?
Yeah, they're doing a terrific job. I couldn't praise them more. Really they've been enormously supportive of me. I've been doing this job, I think, 1.5 years. I'm not quite sure. It all's a bit of a blur. And they've helped me through that absolutely brilliantly. And together, we're getting good result for this year. So, yeah, it's without a doubt that the analysis, that the amount of analysis we go through is enormous. So we are, for instance, we've produced an account of every single operational asset we have that is owned by Guildford Borough Council, including, obvious things like Millmead, and clinically looking at it all and saying, are we getting the best return out of those assets? And this spreadsheet, which one of the officers produced, goes on for page after page after page. We own an enormous amount, and it's easy for things to slip between the gaps, you know. And equally, you know, in Millmead, we have lots of empty space. We've just rented to, am I allowed to? It's the NHS, and we just rented half a floor to them. That is really valuable income. So we have to constantly look at what we've got and exploit our assets to get the best return.
Valuable income and supporting an essential public service.
Oh, absolutely right. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And that means
now we're coming. I'm sorry to cut across you, Tim, but I was aiming for 20 minutes. We're nearly there. I've just got one last question for you. Conservative leader at GBC, Paul Spooner, said at the executive meeting that he was going to hold off any criticism about the budget or making observations on it until the next stage, I guess the next stage of the council process on agreeing the budget. Do you have any idea what his criticisms may be? Has he spoken to you about them?
No, I mean, Councillor Spooner is far more experienced than I am. We differ enormously in as much as, you know, he's a politician through and through. And I've learned a huge amount from his ability to politic. I'm not. I'm from a residents' party. I got elected because I didn't like the way Guildford Borough Council was being run. I hate the local plan. I proposed the review and the update of the local plan, and that's getting that through is one of the proudest things I think I've achieved, and it was one of my biggest objectives. I took over running this portfolio of finance to free up Josh Bigmore in order to be the leader of the council. You know, quite honestly, this was the biggest hospital pass anybody could receive at that time.
But what sorry, Tim, but what I'm trying to get at is, do you know what the Conservatives are proposing as alternatives to your budget plans?
No, I don't. I think no, I think there's a difference also. You know, I am still very fresh to this, and I look at it, I believe, very objectively. I think it's harder to look at it objectively if you've been on the council for many, many years. I mean, you hear of councillors who've been on for 24, 28 years. I think you lose perspective then. You live in a world where Guildford's finances were easy. You know, we were flush with money. It was when somebody put their hand out and said, look, we're short of money, Guildford, can you stomp up 50 grand? It was an easy decision to make. It isn't now, unfortunately. We just don't have 50 grand sitting around that we can easily hand out. But I think if you've been on the council for a long time and you're used to it being flush with money, you haven't got your head around the reality that we're in at the moment.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And thank you for your time. I much appreciate it. And hopefully those that are interested, I know that these are quite arcane matters, but of course the money is important in all government, and therefore, you know, we should be maintaining our view of what's going on at the council with the budget. And thank you very much for explaining it.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.